My name is Charlie. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a non binary Twitch streamer and filmmaker. Something that has brought me joy recently has been my partner, our little found family. I've gotten so much support from people recently, both in terms of everything going on with anti trans legislation and just general treatment of trans people, but also just in general, like lately I have noticed a big surge of like friendship and community in my life, and I've just been constantly grateful for it.
Hi everyone, I'm Julian. My pronouns are they, he. I am agender, trans, genderqueer. Something that's brought me joy recently is just seeing my garden flourish. I'm kind of like a newbie when it comes to gardening right now, and I never thought I could keep anything alive because I just had like such a track record of killing every succulent I've ever owned. So the fact that I have a flourishing garden right now and own like 45 plants is kind of bonkers to me.
My name's Ezra, aka Butch Twink. Pronouns he, they, a transgender non-conforming man. And something that has brought me joy recently, my cat. I've been kind of rearranging my house, and my cat's living for it because he can climb on more things now. So, yeah, seeing him happy makes me happy.
Hi, I'm Margot, the witch. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. My gender identity is trans woman. Something that has brought me joy recently. Therapy. Therapy's good. Therapy's good, and my therapist is hot. So that's always a plus.
I can't follow that. Hi, I'm Tofi. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a gender non-binary trans umbrella, and I'm a Chinese slash Asian American person. And I like Shrek. I think Shrek brings me a lot of joy. My cats bring me joy. I just moved in with a new roommate who is one of my best friends, and they've got a dog. And so getting the dog and the cats acquainted has been a blast because Toph, we got a gate on the door, and Toph will just go up and scream his little head off at poor Aries, and Aries just takes it.
Hello, my name is Dominic, also known as Trans Guy Energy. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a trans man. And something that's brought me joy is bringing eyeliner back into my makeup routine because I feel comfortable enough to do it now, and I feel like still very man. I love it.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here and for introducing yourselves. Before we get into any sort of like heavy discussion, because we are going to start with that,
Like to kind of give disclaimers like this whenever we're on panels and things like that, especially because representation is important, and especially in the queer community and especially the trans community. Colorism is a really big thing, and so we just wanted to throw out the nuance here that even though many of us are POC, right, a lot like many of us do have those identities. This is a pretty light panel, like not white because I don't want to erase those identities, but is a pretty light panel, and so like our experiences and the things that we talk about are going to be vastly different than like darker skinned folks are going to be talking about on future panels and things like that. And so big thing to just kind of plug that, like listen to those voices, find people on Twitch, find people on Twitter, find people on TikTok, like all these advocates who, are darker than us and who talk about their experiences because those are incredibly important, especially now with everything kind of going on. So yeah.
absolutely. What do you feel is the biggest or most common misconception about trans people?
I feel like one big thing is that I feel like people always assume that everyone in the trans community experiences dysphoria, which definitely isn't true. There are people who are trans who don't experience dysphoria, just the identities don't line up, and that all of us like want to get on HRT and go through surgeries, which again, not all of us do. I feel like those are the main two things that I always kind of hear, and I'm like, hey, nope, and we're not going to discredit anyone's transness because they don't want to do these things.
Especially like I'm on Grinder a lot, and it's not like the best for trans people. Because usually we get a lot of like chasers who are always like, have you transitioned fully or have you done the surgeries? And it's like, that's crazy that you think I have like that amount of money and that kind of like accessibility to just like, oh yeah, like my doctor, just down the street, did my teeth, did my,
Literally.
XYZ. And on top of that, like the misconception that trans women are drag queens or that trans women are cross dressers, and those are like two separate things. And that's one thing that I had to like unlearn myself as well, like in the initial aspects of it. But thankfully, I had like some trans elders who like walked me through and they were like, no, like you're wrong. And I was like, oh, okay, well, period. I'm always open to learning and being wrong because it gives me the opportunity to learn. But there are trans women who are drag queens, but like the difference is that when they take off their makeup, they're still a woman.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions in the trans community, and like this is a bit of a call in, kind of something that we already touched on with a disclaimer, is thinking that because you're trans, you're like the most marginalized when your whiteness is still going to always prioritize over that. So I think a lot of white trans folks are under the impression that they're, being the most attacked right now. And when the reality is that a lot of these bills are really affecting the brown and the black folks the most.
Mhm.
So I wish that's something that we talked about a little bit more and held ourselves more accountable.
Absolutely. Oppression does not negate privilege.
I don't even know if it's really a common one right now, if we're just hearing it a lot because of like how loud this minority is, but the whole like trans and non-binary and whatever, like LGBTQ people are like groomers and pedophiles, which I'm assuming if people are hearing this panel, they probably don't believe that. But the fact that people are saying that and that we need to have rebuttals to it is absolutely ridiculous to me.
Yeah.
Like, we shouldn't even have to argue against that. I'm like, what is that?
Yeah.
Like, what is that argument? That is just like insane.
Yeah.
But
And the fact that, I mean, the hypocrisy and the irony of they go from, if you're a minor and you're identifying as trans, you're like a victim. But then as soon as you turn 18, you're perceived as a predator and a pedophile. I'm like,
I literally saw a post on that where a trans youth was like, I'm supposedly the people they're trying to protect right now. At what point do I become a groomer
yeah.
and the person that they're targeting?
And I don't speak for everybody, but in my experience, a lot of trans and queer folk tend to be victims of grooming or predation, and if that's a word. And it's just ridiculous. It's
Mhm.
like, how do I become like what?
When testifying against or like for or against a bill, the authors of the bill are allowed to invite people to testify. And I just think it's funny how they bring in, there's this one real well-known detransitioner who
Mhm.
they keep bringing to the Capitol. The whole like, oh, they're trying to save us. And it's like, save us from what?
As a result of misconceptions like these, obviously, trans people will face a lot of different microaggressions in their day to day lives when they go out in public, as well as macroaggressions, just straight up violence. There's a huge range of reactions that we can get from people. And so I was curious if anybody here wanted to share some microaggressions that either you maybe commonly experience or just any that have really stuck out in your memory.
When a friend of mine had recently come out as trans, she had kept using the word biological or female and male. And I personally am not a fan of those words because it's so binary and it cuts out like intersex people and all this types of like things like that. And it definitely felt like a microaggression, and it was difficult to get her to understand that because I didn't have the words, I don't have the vocabulary. I often don't have that type of gift. Like mine's very like layman terms, like I just know that I understand it and I don't know how to like explain it. And another microaggression is always like, especially when it comes to like reproductive rights, like people who tend to be more vocal about like cis women than like trans men, and also like people who tend to have uteruses, like they kind of get excluded out of that conversation. And it always rubs me the wrong way, especially when it comes from someone who claims to be an ally, because it's like you say you're an ally, yet you're not listening, you're not expanding your own thought process when it comes to things of that nature. And it's not like I'm gonna like cancel somebody if they say like female or male, but I'm just gonna be like, okay, what do you mean by that?
I think a microaggression that a lot of trans masks might face, or at least the language that I've been hearing a lot lately, is a lot of, oh, well, these girls, they're being forced to do this or do that. And it's just like, okay, so not only are you being transphobic, but you're also being sexist. I don't think a lot of people realize the impact of their statements when they are saying these little things.
Yeah, I think some common ones, like especially at like the workplace and ones that I face, is like just the assumption of honorifics people use, pronouns people use, things like that based on voice, based on name. And like it might not seem like a big deal to a lot of folks to like, oh, I hear the name like Jennifer. Obviously, they're going to use she, her pronouns. Like things like that happen a lot. So little things like that where it's just like, can we please stop thinking like these are all made up words. Like, come on, let's just check like intranets, like check profiles because people have pronouns listed or things like that, which is always so irritating. Or like also when like people will assume pronouns and stuff based on the way you're expressing as well, because there's a lot of folks who like express like femininely but then use mask, like use he and pronouns and things like that, because gender expression versus gender identity and like the pronouns you use are different. Like some people match up to that, some people don't. There's like a wide range. And so little microaggressions and like, oh, you're wearing makeup. Like, why are you wearing makeup if you don't use she, her pronouns? Like, why do you look like this if you use these other pronouns? And it's like, because break those binary boxes down. Like, we see men wearing like makeup and nails. Like, we're getting there. Please just like listen to people and stop that. And it's so difficult to try to get people to start breaking those down and like being like, oh, maybe I should start asking people and not assuming all of these. And it's just very common, and especially in workplaces. And that makes it so much harder to feel like you can actually use the identity you want, use the pronouns you want. Like for me at work, like I had to change my name to like a traditionally man's name. I use he, they pronouns at work because otherwise I just constantly get misgendered as a she, her. So like I always have to like think about that and like the way that other people are going to perceive me in order to make sure that I'm safe, and like drop my voice in calls, never be on video, like things like that to try to keep my safety. So a lot of little things.
Yeah, I think kind of going along with that, another thing that I've noticed is pretty common is that in group settings, a lot of people will only ask people who they perceive to be trans their pronouns and not everyone else in the group. And they kind of do it as this way of like, oh, I'm being an ally. I'm just making sure I don't misgender you, but you didn't ask anybody else. You only asked the person who you think you're going to misgender. And that to me is not allyship at all. It's just kind of faking your way through it and trying to make people seem like you're doing a good job when in reality you're kind of just making it harder. You're singling us out. You're pretty much clocking us in front of everyone. So not a fan of that one.
Yeah, it's a very othering experience, very othering, and it's an interesting thing to find a balance with, because I've read several different perspectives on like let's say first day of class introductions, right? Do we give everyone the option? Do we force everyone to give their pronouns so that nobody gets singled out? Or like what is the, because it's nobody should be forced to provide information like that if they're not comfortable, if they're not out. But at the same time, if the only people who are providing it are the trans people, then that singles us out. It's a whole thing. And when people who are organizing that don't have like the resources to learn about it, or like people in the class who can help them figure out what's the best way to go about it, it turns into a nightmare.
So when I first started using, my pronouns used to just be they, them, and I recently changed them to they, he. But when I first started using they, them pronouns, which I think at this point has been 6 or 7 years ago, someone who was close to me at the time, when I told them, they were like, but you're so femme. Like, how can you be non-binary? I was like, excuse me? Like, I don't owe you androgyny. Like, you think that a non-binary person has to be like this, like, white, skinny person with like a shaved head and like perfectly androgynous, like a freaking alien or something? Like, I'm like, excuse me, no. So it was like this misconception of what a non-binary person looks like. And it's like, I guess this can go hand in hand with like, I think one of the previous questions about misconceptions, or maybe it's this question, I don't remember, but maybe it was last question. But yeah, for non-binary people specifically, like people have this like idea of what a non-binary person should look like, and it's like, no, anybody can be non-binary. It doesn't matter your skin color, your religion, your age, race, like ethnicity, none of that matters. Like you can have long hair, you can have short hair, you can have piercings, you can be femme, you can be masculine looking, like you can be androgynous. But that was like one thing I encountered a lot, is like almost people being incredulous, like, how can you be non-binary? you know and it's like I don't know, I've been through all phases with my hair and my makeup and my gender expression, like the way I present myself, and I still every step of the way felt like people were almost challenging me on that. So that was very frustrating and something I still deal with.
I've noticed that a lot of people who are either new to the idea of non-binary or people who don't know anything about it at all, their immediate mental image is like androgynous, skinny, white AFAB person, always. And that's just not the case for everybody. That's not even probably the majority of cases.
Another like kind of, which I don't know, I consider it a microaggression, is people who build spaces for like women and non-binary people is what they'll call them, or like non-cis, like not cis men, everyone but cis men kind of spaces. But then when you kind of go through, it's just like it's literally like no non-binary AMAB folks, like, and people who are non-binary but present more as like men, like aren't allowed in those spaces, like don't feel safe in those spaces, and like I don't know, it's just something that we have seen across a lot of like the gaming spaces with like Gamehers and Dream 1000 Dreams Fund and all of these like organizations who are like, I feel like it's like on the back end, my brain's like, okay, they're trying to be inclusive, which we love that. But at the same time, it just, I don't know, it always feels really gross to me because there's always a threshold of where they will cut off to who doesn't count. And most of the time, it's people they consider men and just don't want to say don't want to say it.
No, I completely understand what you're talking about. I've experienced that firsthand so many times. Let me get ready for whatever Ezra is about to drop. Okay.
Okay, so I went from 6th through 12th grade. I was at an all-girls school, and I had come out as a trans guy in my sophomore year of high school. When everyone found out where I was going my first year of undergrad, they were like, "What?" I had chosen to go to a women's college. And I use women's college very loosely because there were still guys on the campus because it wasn't just women. A lot of people were like, why would you want to do that? And I even, whenever my high school counselor even recommended that school to me, I was like, dude, have you not seen what I have been going through for the past 2 years? Like, what the But I sit and I think, and I'm like, I was not ready to go into a cis man's, like, men's dorm or whatever. Imagine that shock. So whenever there are these spaces that are like supposed to be inclusive, it frustrates me for one because a lot of AMAB non-binary folks just being flat out excluded because they don't look trans enough or whatever, that whole narrative that a lot of people like to use as an excuse. It really irks me and it really grinds my gears because if you want to have a safe space for marginalized identities, then you can't just say like women and non-binary folk. Like, marginalized identities includes trans men. And I know that there's probably people who are gonna hear me say that and be like not happy with it because there have been so many people who have told me that already. But like at the end of the day, I'm still trans. Like, wild concept, a trans person is still trans.
A point that I think either Tofi or Julian had made me realize that misconceptions often lead to microaggressions, especially if like people don't ask questions or don't feel safe enough to ask questions. Because like, yeah, something, I don't believe that there are no stupid questions, especially when Google is heavily available and you can definitely educate yourself at some point instead of asking somebody to kind of put the free labor in for you. And it's just like, oh Lord, like if I could just have a document that I have saved where I could be like, here is like everything that you need to know, everything that you have asked or were wanting to ask. And then I also, Tofi reminded me that a lot of the microaggressions that I do get are because of my voice or if I'm sporting some facial hair. And I tend to, like, especially on Twitch, I use like a Snapchat filter that removes my 5 o'clock shadow in my beard so it looks like, nice and smooth. But then like I can't really do much with my voice. Like it is what it is. I've had a love-hate relationship with it because before puberty I was always like thought to be like a woman and I was like not a girl. And then once it finally happened I was like I am a girl. Now I'm a girl with a deep voice. And it's so annoying, like on the phone, going through the drive-through. I tend to DoorDash or pick up if it's better. I sometimes become like almost selectively mute in spaces, like especially at checkout at the HEB or if I don't feel like I'm gonna get gendered properly, I'm just like, I ain't gonna say shit. I'm just gonna be quiet. I'm gonna like just nod, and if they say something wrong, I'll just ignore it. Or if I'm feeling crazy that day, I'll definitely be like, you think I'm a man? And like just like gaslight the crap out of them, and then I'll leave them confused. But more often than not, I just choose to be very like silent.
I was thinking about microaggressions that I've faced. There have been many, but I think the most memorable and the most relevant to, the idea of like the misconceptions leading to these microaggressions. There, I think, is a huge misconception with testosterone that it completely causes infertility. That is not the case. Now, you shouldn't be taking your testosterone while you're pregnant, but that's a different matter. But my other health issues aside, when I was on testosterone, and this was, I think, 7 years ago when this happened, my roommate at the time, we were talking about having kids, and like, regardless of whether I want kids or not, she said to me, completely unprompted and unprovoked, "You're so lucky that testosterone makes it impossible for you to have kids." And I just looked at her and I said, "What the like, what kind of thing is that to say to somebody? Like, you don't know what I want out of life. You don't know if I want to adopt, if I want to have my own kids. You don't know if I want to raise kids at all. Like, why would you ever make an assumption about somebody to that magnitude?" It hurt, man. Because for a while I did want kids, and now with all my health issues and other stuff, I don't know. Maybe I'll foster one day, but more people need to do that. But it's like I really struggled with the idea of like not actually being able to carry a child for some reason. I've really struggled with that thought, and I don't want other people making it worse for me just because they don't do any research or they don't think before they speak. So, regardless of anybody's personal preference about having kids, you should never say like that to people. As a trans person of color, in what ways have your experiences differed from the white trans people around you?
Yeah, I feel like I can't say much on it because I am, even though like I'm Asian American, I'm Chinese, I grew up very Americanized, right? And I feel like a lot of the times white people have no fucking clue what I am. Like I actually had people at Taco Bell one time, like they were like making bets in the back on what I was because they couldn't figure it out. It was very funny. I thought it was hilarious. And one of them got it right. But like I feel like one thing that's always really stressful is like I don't go out often because panini and whatever. So I like only go to like doctors and grocery stores, like, necessities. But like, I feel like I always have to, especially with how, I don't know, how anti Asian things really got at the beginning of the pandemic, especially like it was really dangerous. Like I always constantly like had to think about, like, what could I wear? What could I look like? How can I make sure that I'm, not being around as many white people as possible, like specific grocery stores I could go to, specific like areas I could go to, because like being trans on top of, being Asian in the last couple of years was just a lot to deal with, especially with like the media. So really like limiting like consumption of media and news, like because mental health was just not it for a really long time, and still continues to not be, which is just, I don't know. There's just a lot of layers, I think, that you know, there's already a lot you have to think about just being, queer in general, but then being trans and then with any other like identities that you have, it's really stressful. But to leave that with one good point, my grandpa. So for Chinese, my grandparents don't speak a lot of like a lot of English, and so it's really nice because he doesn't really understand the difference between like beautiful versus handsome versus like all those like English words. And so it's really nice because he'll see pictures of me and go, "Oh, you're so handsome," even though he doesn't know I'm trans. And I'm just like, yeah. So there's a positive out of that.
I love that.
Yeah.
Go, Grandpa.
So I live in Texas, and I didn't realize how much of an effect the color of my skin had on me until a recent incident that happened at the organization that I was working for before the current organization that I work for. Our main community manager, we were having a little like rally against one of the bills that was being debated, and our community engagement manager, she dropped a little banner that said protect trans kids, or like let trans kids grow up. And banners have been dropped in the Capitol Rotunda for Lord knows how long. And she wasn't the only person who was there who dropped it. But so whenever the Capitol, and I believe they're just DPS, Texas DPS, they approach her and they're like, you need to pick that up now, blah, 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 blah. You know, there were other people there who were helping her hold up because it was a huge banner. Like, there's just no way that she could have done it by herself. But there were 2 white people right next to her helping her. And who was the person who got banned from the Capitol for a year? The trans Latino woman. And then after that happened, I was walking up to go sit in the gallery, which is above where all the senators are like debating and talking on the floor. And I actually had one of these, or it was a stack of these postcards. Keep in mind, they are filled out and whatever. And I also have like a regular poster, and they're like, oh, no signs in the gallery. So I dropped the poster, and I'm like, okay. And then I'm walking in, and they were like, no, we can't, like, no signs in the gallery. And then they point to these, and I'm like, oh, these are postcards. Flip them over, show them the full. And they're like, well, we still can't allow that. And I'm like, okay. So I'm putting them in my bag, whatever, thinking that that's going to be the end of that. And they're like, no, we still can't allow that. And I'm like, but what about all the other people who have their bags and backpacks in here? Like, what? And so I was like, you know what? I'm not doing this today because after seeing what happened with Sophia. So I'm like, okay, I'm leaving. But before I leave, I'm putting the postcards in my backpack so I can just walk out and go on with my day. Then one of the officers like turns me around, and I'm like, don't be touching, like, what the? And I'm like, and so I just put my hands up and I said, I'm complying, I'm leaving. I walk out the door, and I texted Dominic and I was like, I don't know, they are just out for the brown trans people today. So he picks me up, we go, we're hanging out, whatever. And then I find out one of my other coworkers who didn't do anything, was just helping guide folks out and like just making sure everyone got out safely. And then I guess one of the DPS officers took them like making sure that everyone was out as them not complying or not listening, and my person got arrested. And the second I saw that footage, I could not stop sobbing because it was like, wow, like I was over here complaining about my little postcards, but this person got arrested and they weren't doing anything. But because they were a brown person, because I know that if my white coworkers were to have done that same thing, nothing would have happened. Right there, that's just racism, textbook definition of racism at that point. And it's really freaking hard being brown and being trans right now. I mean, like Tofi mentioned earlier, I'm light skinned. I'm pretty sure if you ask someone who is visibly darker than me, I don't even think, I probably just would have been arrested as well. It's really hard. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Even if you look at like a lot of like videos about when things like this happen and people are getting arrested, like you can see that like these fucking policemen will literally go out of their way, even if like their white compatriots are like sitting there shielding them, they will go out of the way to push the white people out of the way to straight go for the black and brown folks. So like it's not even a subtle thing at this point. It's like very much intentional.
I recently had a conversation with my brother. He's not trans, but he's definitely like lighter than I am, and he's also like an American citizen, where I am a Mexican in America. Shout out to Texas. And I don't think he realized a lot of like the privileges that he has, and he probably still doesn't, because he often gets pulled over by cops for speeding and he just doesn't care, and he often gets let go. And I was just like, that's crazy, because every cop interaction I've ever had, I've either ended up in jail, on probation, beat up, like completely different experiences. And it's so wild to me because my brain still can't fathom. It's like, why are we treated so differently just based off of our skin tone? Like, It's so frustrating. And when the trans friend that I was talking about previously, whenever she was coming out, she's white and she would like get drunk and walk out at the streets at night to come over to my house. And I was like, girl, you can't do that. Like, you're going to get pulled over by the cops, so you're going to get in trouble, or like, you know, you're still trans. But she was using that white privilege to her advantage, which, you know, go for it, I suppose. Um, and almost immediately she had access to like HRT because of like Medicare or because of rich parents. Meanwhile, like I'm still nowhere near being able to start HRT. I set up an appointment to see if like I'll be able to even afford it. But it can be frustrating because some people like start it immediately, and not that, you know, I'm not trying to say like that I'm upset that they're doing it, but like I would like to do it too. And it's just I don't have that capability or that ease of access.
Mhm.
And even when like, you know, I do trans funds or like crowd trans funds for like the things that I need, whether it's like probation fees or lawyer fees or HRT fees, my type of like GoFundMe doesn't get as much attention or access as the white counterparts do. And that's also incredibly just like frustrating, and it puts a bad taste in my mouth, but I'm trying not to make me hate all white people. Because there's some good ones out there. Oh, that sounds terrible.
Ally.
Margot, I just want to say I feel you really hard. Your feelings are valid. Like, I feel you so hard.
Oh, I love you, sweet BB.
2 years ago, when I was actively trying to see all these different doctors, I think I saw like 15 different doctors in 2021 try and get to the bottom of what was wrong with me, for, you know, lack of a better phrase. The majority of them simply gave up, didn't care, didn't order tests, just didn't want to deal with it. And it got to the point that several of them accused me of lying about how much pain I was in and about my mobility. And after having 2 years to reflect on those experiences, and after finally now finding a primary care doctor in my new city where I live now that respects me as a human being, it does make me wonder if me being trans had anything to do with my treatment by those medical professionals. And now, and here's my professional little segue into the next segment after we come back from the break. Now I'm terrified that I'm not even going to be able to access the healthcare that I just finally found for myself, because one of the bills that Florida, I think, either has passed or is going to probably pass is a bill that allows medical professionals to deny care. Is SB 1580, Protections of Medical Conscience, which allows healthcare providers and healthcare payers, so health insurance, to deny coverage or deny care based on religious or moral convictions. So, especially for people like in Florida with all of these going on, and I know Texas, Ezra, you said that there were about 100 bills kind of in action right now. What would you say to people who tell us to just move?
I mean, I just tweeted this the other day because I'm getting so tired of it, especially as someone who came from California to Texas. People are constantly being on me about going back to Cali, but I left California because it's unaffordable in every way possible. You could live in the worst city and you still cannot pay your rent.
Mhm.
So to me, that is not a safe city if I cannot afford to eat and pay my rent. So I moved to Texas. People tell me that I need to leave all the time, that they're worried for my safety all the time. So the other day I tweeted, I'm going to start requesting your emails so I can invoice you every single time you ask that, because you're not paying for the expenses. You're not the one breaking your work contract. You're not losing your friends. You're not losing your community. You're not losing everything that you built in the place that you're living. So at this point, it's very tiring for me and annoying. And it comes from a place of privilege of these people aren't experiencing these bills in the same way, or maybe to the same degree that we are experiencing in places like Florida and Texas. So they're not fully understanding that it's not just a simple solution to just pack up and go. And
Mhm.
these are usually white folks of the upper to middle class. They just like to, come in with their little unsolicited advice and walk away like nothing happened.
Even as we were prepping for this panel, I've been like kind of on edge, especially with folks who say they like live in safe states or sanctuary states, because at the end of the day, we still live in America. Even when people say like safer states, I'm still like, okay, but this is still America. And as a brown person, how privileged of you to just say, oh, just move. Like, oh, so you want me to literally just like leave the place that I've lived at my entire life? I love my family. I'm very grateful for my family. I also don't want to put my kids through that. Like, no. It's so, so, so upsetting to hear all these people say, just move. Why do we have to compromise to live our lives and to be who we are? Like, no, that's just silly. Silly, silly, silly.
I completely agree. I mean, even if we were financially able to move, and let's say that there was somewhere that we could all move to that was free of all these horrible things that we all have to experience in different ways, we shouldn't have to. We shouldn't be forced to just because all these fucking assholes in power want to get rid of us. If they have a problem with us, they can move.
So I work as a senior data analyst at a healthcare company, and like that's we work with a lot of like states and like governmental contracts and things like that, and that's something that we constantly kind of hear about, like with like people like constantly ask us, hey, like, are you gonna still do work with like Alabama and Texas and Florida? Are you still gonna like take their contracts and do the kind of work that y'all are doing there? And it's just like it gets really frustrating because we always have to have this conversation of like, yes, we're still going to take these because the people who live here deserve to have healthcare. Like they deserve to have that. And like, even if like most trans people can just uproot their whole entire fing life and go, what about the folks who can't? Like, we can't just abandon them because you can get out and do better. Like, it's just, I don't know. It just doesn't, it never sits right. And it's always really frustrating to hear people at a healthcare company, like at an equity based healthcare company, continue to ask us that. And it's just like, y'all, how equitable do you think you really are if you're asking these? Like, what? I just want to scream into the abyss every single time because it's just really hard to like get it through their brains that you can't just do that. Like the closeted people who can't even come out, like they're gonna get fucked over too. Like it's just you can't just abandon these people.
Absolutely. Julian?
Margot and I keep raising our hand at like the exact same time. I kind of went into this earlier about people saying like, oh, just move, just move, just move. So I don't want to get like too deep into it. I will say that a lot of the people saying like, oh, just move to these states or whatever. It's like, I think there's only 4 states out of the entire country who are not passing these laws. And a lot of these like blue states, they're really expensive. Like, have you looked at like houses in friggin' Portland, Oregon? They're like $600,000. I was like, what? And even Oregon, people are like, Oregon's so progressive. I'm pretty sure they've like passed a couple or have some in the pipeline that they're gonna pass or something. It's just like nowhere is really completely safe. And like I've lived here since I was like 3 years old. I'm 32 now. I've been here like my entire life. My family's here. My spouse was born in Florida. Their entire family's here. It's like you want me to uproot my entire support system and leave behind all of these people. It's like, sure, I guess I could move out of state and like be safer and continue to help the people here, but it's like I don't want to do that. Like this is my home. No one's going to drive me away. I'm going to stay and fight. I'm going to do the best I can for the people in my community. I don't even know if my life would be better if I moved to another state. Like that's a whole grass is greener argument. Like I could spend all this time, energy and money moving and then that state passes the same friggin' bills, especially if you know who wins presidency and just starts making America Florida like he wants to do. None of you are safe. And the fact that you guys are in these blue states looking down on us, like on your high horse, like, oh, we're in these blue states. We're like so much better and more enlightened than you Southerners. Like, you should just move and get out of there and we'll just, saw Florida off into the ocean. I'm just like, no, go yourself. Like, shut up. I'm so tired of people talking down to me because I live in Florida as if I'm like not, as if you're better than me or something. It's like, no. So sick of it.
To add to all of that, it's like, yeah, maybe it's safer for like trans folks, but that doesn't exclude like microaggressions or racism wherever we may move to. Like, it's not always going to be 100% more safe. And there is this thing in astrocartography where it tells you like where you would best flourish, in your life, whether financially, romantically, or wherever. But even then, like still like that doesn't protect from colorism, any of the other things that, you know, people have to deal with outside of just being trans. And I'm a firm believer of like being in Texas, loving Texas. I love Texas. Yeehaw, motherfucker. I want to be here to be able to see like the youth see us be here still. Like, because if we all leave, then who do they have to look up to? Who do they have to protect them? We're adding to that mental health of like, no one is here. No one is helping us. I'm not going to have that. I'm going to sit my pretty ass here and they're going to like it.